Welcome back. It's book number 52, the last book of the year, last book of 2021. It's been 52 books this year, one book a week. Finally, I'm very pleased and proud to have achieved this reading goal, and I'm very pleased to be sharing a pretty strong book with you on this review called No Friend But the Mountains by Behrouz Boochani, who is an Iranian-Kurd journalist who spent almost 5 years in a detention center, a prison, on an island called Manus Island, which, for those of you who don't know, is an island in Papua New Guinea where the Australian government was basically deporting and relocating illegal immigrants and refugees trying to reach Australia by boat. And they were detaining them with no charge, and while they were awaiting some sort of processing of their refugee status claims. And the only issue really in all of this was that Manus Island was essentially, as this book describes, a sort of hell on earth. And this Iranian-Kurd journalist, he had fled Iran because he was being persecuted for political beliefs, for being a Kurd. Kurds have notoriously been in the crossfire of wars between Iran, Iraq, conflicts with Turkey, and so on. So there's a lot of persecution going on there, and this chap tried to reach Australia, got intercepted by the Australian Navy, and deported to Manus Island. So this book is very interesting in the sense of the life of a prisoner, and a very specific type of prisoner, in that it is a prisoner with no hope in a system which he calls the kyriarchical system, which is a system of oppression, trying to break prisoners through various psychological means and tricks, and very small things designed to foster a climate of tension and violence inside this prison. And it does sound like hell on earth. I had an experience which nowhere near compares what this guy went through. But as many of you who were following me last year might remember, I was detained with very legally questionable claims for 40 days in a hospital in Singapore with COVID, and I was not allowed to leave. And I remember the feelings of fear and near hopelessness, even though my period of detention was a fraction of this guy's, but near hopelessness, that not knowing when you're going to be released and what is going to happen. And there is no charge, and you just don't know where this is going to end. And so I identify quite strongly with that sense of it. Having said that, the book is maybe a little too poetic for me. And in fact, the book is divided between prose and poetry. Truth be told, the poetry is not great. It's a little bit literal and not that interesting. And I do wish that there had been more in the text about his emotions around hopelessness and his psychological state, which is hinted at perhaps, but really not delved into all that deeply. He also depicts the cast of characters in an unusual way. Everybody's given a nickname. The nickname is capitalized in a sort of weird postmodern novel kind of thing, which would work if it was limited to maybe 2 or 3 characters. But here, everybody's got their little nickname, and it just starts to feel a little gimmicky, a little bit like a trick, some sort of literary device. And it doesn't work, especially because the book is not particularly character driven. There are small vignettes of episodes with certain characters, but certainly nothing to sustain character development over an arc of an entire book. And so in that sense, it was disappointing. Another thing I found a little bit disappointing was that I was hoping there'd be some sort of examination. And I know in my detention, did go through that examination in my head, the examination with regard to the morality and the legality of the detention and the issue of my responsibility in that detention. And there's really very little there. There's no examination of the wider issue of migration, of illegal migration, of the issues that the Australian government faces in trying to control that migration, and I think, as I understand it, clash with the criminal human trafficking, smuggling networks that thrive on these sort of movements of people. And there's very little examination of this. So I come out of this thinking, well, what would one do? How would one manage this policy? I'm a bit of a policy wonk, and I would think, how would you manage this? How do you not create some form of moral hazard and encourage more people to, open the floodgates, but at the same time, how do you maintain a humane and open and welcoming policy to these sort of migrants and refugees, many of whom are fleeing horrible persecution. And there's a feeling, one thing the book does quite well is to show, well, these migrants, people like him, aren't people who want to live in war. They don't, they're not desensitized to violence. Just like you or I, when the mortars start falling and the guys with guns start showing up, they want to leave. They want to go somewhere safe. And so that movement needs to be examined much more closely. And so I guess the question I have after reading this book is, why isn't the Australian government processing these claims a bit more thoroughly? Why is there this need of creating all this hopelessness? It seems like I understand the moral hazard aspect of the deterrence, but at the same time, I think that, if there are claims that should be processed and that should be accepted, then they should be processed in the correct way. So I think that aspect was missing a little bit from there. As I understand it, having done a little bit of research about his life in the last 5 years, he has now been released and is now living in New Zealand, where he's been granted an indefinite visa to stay and work in New Zealand. And he's a professor at a university in New Zealand. So I think he's got a lot to teach and to share with students, but also with wider society on this very specific experience. So look, if you're interested in this kind of literature around detention, illegal or immoral detention, then this is certainly something that will get your blood boiling, because there's a lot in there to get angry about, a lot of injustice, a lot of inhumanity. If you're after an examination of the policy side of migration and what could be done in order to better understand and manage these flows of people, including fighting against some of the criminal networks involved in this business, then this book is not for you. It doesn't delve at all into this aspect. So, very interesting book from a strictly daily life impact of a prison on a human being. Less interesting on the policy side. I'd love to hear from any of you what books you might have read with regard to the aspect of detaining people, policies around that, especially with regard to migration. I'd love to understand a little bit better what any of you might have read and what you might recommend to me or the wider community. And having said that, I'm, again, very proud to finish my 52 books this year, and I'm wishing you all a very happy new year. All the best for 2022. Stay tuned, because I'll be proposing some coaching on how to set some reading resolutions for 2022 and how to achieve them, how to stick to your reading plans and read more than you ever thought was possible. It's all about going step by step, one at a time, and building up that reading muscle. So anyway, again, in the meantime, Happy New Year to all of you, and all the best for 2022.